So once again, thank you all of you for joining us today, or again, watching this, watching the recording down the line. It's my pleasure to get the opportunity to introduce all of you today to our speaker, Jyll. So Jyll and I actually go back quite a few years. I can't exactly remember when we first connected.
I have it here.
Oh, you do have it there. Wow.
March 2017.
March 2017, when Jyll was working at Google, she would come in to host AdWord workshops at the DMZ, and that's how her and I first connected. And from there, I would say the relationship between the DMZ and Google, and of course myself and Jyll, only increased from us bringing her back in periodically and bringing other members of the Google team back in to host workshops for all of the folks at the DMZ over 4 years ago now, which is wild to think of. So it definitely, a lot of things make me feel old, and this is definitely one of the things that makes me feel a little bit older. And so it's my pleasure to get the chance to introduce all of you to Jyll, who today is going to be hosting a workshop on growth marketing. And so I know that this is a topic that is near and dear to a lot of you. And so we're really excited to have her come and facilitate this session. Just as some quick kind of housekeepings, as I mentioned, this session will be recorded and will be available on our portal. So if you want to access it afterwards, or if there's a member of your team who wants, or you think it would be really important for them to be able to get access to, the session will be on the portal, hopefully within, I would say, Monday or Tuesday of next week. The other thing is, if you have any questions, or if there's any clarification that you want to ask, feel free to bring it up throughout the presentation. If the question is a bit more, let's just say, nuanced or specific only to you, we'll just ask that you reserve the questions until the end. And then, of course, for some of you, you do have office hours. And so it may be more appropriate to kind of bring up those very specific items during your office hours. And so without any further ado, all of you are sick of hearing from me. So Jyll, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate you lending some of your time and experience to walk us through growth marketing. And so the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. It's nice to see some familiar faces here and some new faces. So yeah, this picture here is the first time I spoke at the DMZ. I used to speak probably every few months to your fellow entrepreneurs all about growing your business through AdWords, which is now called Google Ads. And actually left Google a few months ago after working there for 6 years. I now run my own growth marketing consulting business. And so wanted to come talk to you today about Google Ads, but stepping back more broadly, how entrepreneurs like yourselves should be thinking about building a profitable growth marketing engine for your business. So today we're going to talk about, first of all, how to define your goals for marketing. Those of you may know my husband, Philip, who's an innate part of your cohort, and it's something we talk about a lot at home. So it's important from a marketing perspective as well, defining your goals and OKRs up front. From there, I'll show you how to find the right audience and bring those users along on the journey with your product or service. Then we'll talk about creating great content that's going to drive that audience to take the action you want them to take. Finally, we'll talk about the numbers part, the geeky part, but really the most important part, which is making sure you have the right data foundation in place to measure the results of all your different marketing programming. And then finally, we'll wrap it up by putting that all together so that you have some concrete next steps you can take to start building or start improving your growth marketing engine. As Shane mentioned, as I'm going through, please feel free to come off mute and ask questions if something's not clear. If there's a question that's really specific to like your business and something you've experienced, just save that to the end. I'll try to wrap up in about 45 minutes, so we will have time for Q&A at the end as well. Any questions before I get started? All right, let's go. So the very first step when you're setting up any kind of marketing activity, whether it's a Google ad or a PR campaign or a billboard, whatever it may be, is defining 3 things: audience, action, and measure. And I'm going to give you a few examples. A business that I actually used to run was an MBA admissions consulting business. So my target audience wasn't just young people, and wasn't even just people applying to business school. It was people applying to top US MBA programs. The more targeted and niche you make your audience, the the better you'll be able to reach them and drive them to do what you want to do. So be really specific when defining your audience. So for my example, it was actually Canadians and Americans applying to top US MBA programs. That's a clearly defined audience that we can reach across offline and online platforms. Next, you have to be really clear about the action you want them to take. Of course, at the end of the day, we all want money for our companies, right? But for many of you, especially if you're in a lead gen type business, it's really hard to take someone who's never heard about you or your company or your value proposition before, and the first time reach them say, buy from me. There's a disconnect there. So think about the actions you want them to take. Again, with my example, what I wanted people to do was fill out a lead form on my website, or even before that, just visit my website to learn more about my services. And so I think for a lot of you watching, your objective with your audience could be taking an action like signing up for your email list, adding something to their shopping cart, filling out a lead form, watching a video about you, something that's going to meet them where they are in their journey. Once you have a clearly defined audience and a clearly defined action you want them to take, you need to then figure out how are you going to measure whether or not they're taking that action. And of course, in a digital ads universe with Google Analytics and conversion tracking, sometimes it's really easy to measure. Number of leads filled out, easy to know. Sometimes it's not as easy to measure, especially if you're looking more traditional media. Like how do you measure the effectiveness of a radio ad? Even if you can't find the perfect unit of measurement, it's better to be approximately right than precisely wrong. So try to pick a way to measure. If you can't measure something at all, then there's no point in putting marketing dollars behind it because you'll never know if those dollars had an ROI or not. So before launching any kind of objective, think about who is the target audience, what is the action you want them to take, and how are you going to measure whether or not they've taken that action. Now, anytime you have a different audience or a different action, that's a different campaign. So I may have one campaign where I'm trying to reach people applying to top US MBA programs, and the action I want them to take is fill out a lead form on my website. I might have another campaign with the same audience, but the action I want them to take is to watch a video on my website. Those are two different actions. And so when you're planning out your marketing initiatives, those need to be treated like two separate campaigns. And similarly, maybe I'd have another audience of people who are thinking of one day applying to an MBA program, but aren't actively doing so right now. That would also be a different audience, therefore a different campaign set up with different objectives. Are there any questions about how to set up the right audience, action, and measure before you start launching a campaign? All right, then we'll go into the next step. So once you have a clearly defined goal of what you want your marketing initiative to achieve, we go on to actually finding that audience that you've clearly defined and bringing them on the journey. And most of you have probably heard of a customer funnel before, right? We think of a funnel like this, of awareness, and then consideration, and then purchase out the bottom. I actually like the champagne glass analogy better, partly because it's pretty, but I'll walk you through it. Basically, at the top of a champagne tower, you pour the champagne in, and champagne doesn't reach the next level until the top one fills up. Only once it's full does the champagne then go on to the next level, which is bigger. It's 4 times bigger. And then only once you've really filled up that level does the champagne then flow down further. The way to think about this is the people in your top champagne glass, that's your perfect target audience who's really ready to purchase from you. And before you try to think about reaching as many people as possible, maximize the opportunity with that smaller audience who's really specific and most likely to convert. Only once you've maximized that opportunity should you then go to the next level of people who might be in consideration phase, will probably purchase from you one day, but may not be ready to purchase right now. That's a much bigger opportunity, but also a longer time horizon to see the ROI. So maximize your highest ROI activities, then go on to increase your reach, and then only once you've maximized efficiently there, going on to the next level. This is a common mistake I see entrepreneurs make as you're launching a product and you say, I just want everyone out there to hear of it. Let's get as many people as possible through. And while that can sound appealing to reach as many people as possible, I find it much better to focus first on the efficiency. Who can I reach most efficiently before finding my next opportunity and then my next opportunity? What I also like about this analogy is you can see that it isn't perfect. You pour champagne into the top glass and you fill it up. But once you go down to the next layers, there's a lot of leakage. Champagne squirts off to the side, right? Runs down the side of the glass. And that's the way marketing works as well, even with digital marketing. You know, not every single dollar you spend will be perfectly measurable and perfectly achieve your desired objective. And the wider and wider you cast your net, the more and more wastage you're going to have. And so that's why, especially when you're getting started with marketing or investing in paid marketing for the first time, you want to maximize your highest ROI activities first before working your way up the funnel or down the champagne tower to larger and larger opportunities. Are there any questions about how this relates to the marketing funnel before we move forward? Okay. So to recap, at the top, it's a marketing funnel upside down. At the top here, that top champagne glass is people who are ready to buy from you. Then once you've maximized that, that next layer, the middle champagne glasses, is people who are in market for your category. You know, people who are currently looking for an MBA program, people who are currently in market for a mattress, people who are currently looking for your software solution, but maybe just haven't heard about you yet. And then that bottom layer, where a lot of startups never even get to needing to tap, is that broad awareness, people who might one day buy something in your category. Maybe someone who just started a business today will be your perfect customer 2 years from now. So you might build awareness with them today so that when it comes time for them to be in consideration phase, they don't even look at competition, they just come straight to you. But I definitely would not recommend starting with awareness because it gets really expensive really fast. So how do you reach your audience? Most of us are very familiar with traditional media channels. Like if you are a fashion company and you want to reach stylish people, you put an ad in Vogue magazine. Or if you, I don't know, are Ontario Gambling and you put an ad along the Gardiner, a billboard in downtown Toronto, you're gonna reach everyone who might be on the way to where you're located. Traditional advertising is what we call context marketing. You wanna reach people based on where they are. They're reading Vogue, they're driving down the Gardiner, they're watching a Friends rerun on TV. You're not actually looking at who the person is, you're looking at where they are. And anybody who walks by that real estate, whether it's in a magazine, a radio, whatever it might be, that's who you want to reach. Digital advertising, not just Google, but Facebook and TikTok and LinkedIn and all of that, lets you target by audience. And what that means is I don't care where the person is, I care who they are. I want to reach people who are in market for accounting software. And whether they're in Gmail, on YouTube, searching for something in an app, whatever it might be, I don't care about the context, the where, I care about the who. And this is really important to think about when you're planning your different marketing activities. Because certain platforms let you market based on context, show an ad based on where people are, and certain platforms let you show an ad based on audience, who they are. In my opinion, digital marketing is so powerful because we actually do care about who people are and not where they are. In my Vogue magazine example, you're putting an ad in Vogue magazine because you assume that most of the people who look at that are interested in fashion. But if you bring that into a digital channel, Google and Facebook and all these platforms, they know who's really interested in fashion. And just because someone's interested in fashion, that doesn't mean they only consume fashion content, right? They may also be interested in cooking or mommy blogs or whatever it might be. And so by advertising based on audience, you can reach the right kind of person regardless of where they are and truly maximize your reach within your target audience. Are there any questions about audience versus context? I know this is sometimes a thing to wrap your head around. All right, then we'll keep moving along together. So to recap where we are, we've clearly defined our campaign, our audience, action, and measure. We understand now how to reach the most profitable audiences and the different ways we can do that with context and audience targeting. And now we're on to action. Once you've reached your audience, what is the thing you actually want them to do? So let's walk through in a Google universe how ads work. So I find this is something that's often quite misunderstood. When you search for something on Google, let's say you're searching for co-working space Toronto. That's something I'm searching for now. You're typing that into the Google search bar, and then pretty instantaneously, you're seeing some ads and then some what we call organic results. The ads are called search engine marketing or SEM or PPC, which stands for pay-per-click, and that's companies who are paying to be at the top of those results. Right below that, you'll see the organic results, which is also called SEO, search engine optimization, and people aren't paying to be there. That's Google's algorithms crawling the web and figuring out which websites are most relevant to what the user is searching for. Although to us as end users, the ads and the organic appear right next to each other, they actually work on totally independent backend systems. So to dispel a common myth, no, you cannot improve your organic Google ranking just by paying for ads. They're independent systems. So what I'm going to be talking about here with how ads work is how the ads work at the top. Note that that is a different practice and subject matter than SEO and organic results, which we won't be touching on today. So with that caveat, the way that ads work is every single time someone searches for something, let's say co-working space Toronto, there are hundreds, if not thousands of advertisers who may be trying to reach those searches. And so what happens there is an auction. But unlike an eBay auction where whoever pays the most wins the Beanie Baby, how it works in Google Ads is a combination of how much the advertiser is willing to pay, but also the quality. And this is a really foundational concept because this is why even though Google was by no means the first search engine, it became the top search engine pretty quickly because results are not just based on who's paying the most, but also on quality, how relevant that search is to the user who's searching for it. And by putting price and quality together and deciding which ads are shown, every single ad is given an ad rank. And this is that foundational Google concept that made Google the multi-billion-dollar company it is today, and that now other search engines, use as well in the way they run. So price is pretty straightforward. You as an advertiser on Google, so for co-working space, if you're WeWork or Spaces or Regus or whatever, you can decide how much you're willing to pay per click, how much you're willing to pay to drive someone to your website. And when you show an ad, you only pay if someone clicks. So it's a pretty good system. You only pay for some kind of business results. But the other piece to that, of course, is quality. And quality, by Google Ads definition, is made up of three things: the expected click-through rate, the relevancy, and the landing page quality. Click-through rate just means for every given time your ad shows, how likely is someone to click on it. So if your ad shows up 100 times, that means 100 impressions. And out of those 100 times it's clicked on twice, that's a 2% click-through rate. And click-through rate is the best measure of how good your ads are, right? Because better ads, people will click on more. That's a really strong signal of letting the user do the talking that yours is the best ad. Relevancy is about a link between what the user searched for, your ad, and your website. So for example, let's say I searched for co-working space Toronto, and the ad says, we have the best co-working space in Toronto. And then I click on it and the website says, welcome to the best co-working space in Toronto. That's a really relevant experience. And to me as a user, I'm going to think, wow, I found exactly what I'm looking for. But let's say that I searched for co-working space Toronto and the ad says, rent an office in Canada. And then I land on a page that just says, look at our North American offices. It might be what I'm looking for, but it might not be. That's not a really relevant experience. And so that advertiser would have a much lower quality score. And then the third piece that's really important for quality score is landing page quality. That's your actual website. Is it relevant, which we just spoke about? Is it original? Is it easy to navigate? Are your privacy policies clearly stated? Google looks at all this stuff because people are all coming to Google billions of times a day, and then Google's taking its users and passing them off to you. And so it wants to make sure that when it does that, your website or app is going to give those users a really good experience. So when most people think about Google Ads or any kind of digital marketing, we often fixate on the bidding and the audience targeting and the keyword selection. That stuff is absolutely important. But the thing that not enough entrepreneurs focus on, and that I'd really like for all of you to focus on when you're thinking about running ads or are running ads, is the ad itself, the content itself. Because all the end user sees when they search co-working space Toronto is the ad. They don't know about your bidding or targeting, and they don't care. They just want to know, is this ad relevant to me? And if it is, they're going to click through on it. It's going to have a high relevance to what they're searching for, and you'll land them on a great landing page with high quality. So quality score is important because, of course, you want to give a relevant, great experience, but it's also important because ad rank, where you show on the page, is a function of both price and quality. That means the higher your quality score, the less you actually have to pay per click to drive people to your site. So one of the best ways to increase your efficiency and lower your cost per click is to increase your quality score. And conversely, if you don't have great content and don't have a really relevant experience and your quality score is poor, you're going to have to pay more than your competitors for the exact same click. So by focusing on quality and creating a relevant experience, first of all, it's just a better user experience and the right thing to do for your users and potential customers. But economically, you're actually going to pay less to get the same number of customers to your business. Any questions about ad rank or quality score?
Do you have any tips on creating a really relevant ad?
I missed the first part of the question. How, what on a really relevant ad?
Oh, do you have any tips on making really relevant ads, like very high quality ads?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think that was Spencer. So my tips for creating really relevant ads, start with keyword selection and then go to the ad. So for example, if someone is searching for co-working space Toronto and someone else is searching for co-working space Montreal, those are different intent. And wherever we have different intent, we need to create a different ad. Whereas if someone is searching for co-working space Toronto and someone else is searching for co-working desk Toronto, those are really similar intent, so those can drive to the same ad. So think about the intent behind the search, and every time you have, again, a different audience, you're trying to drive a different action, you need a different ad. And you can have as many ads as you like, so don't be afraid to have 10, 20, 30 different variations to have that relevance. The next thing I'm going to suggest is often we will pick your keywords one day and write your ads a different day. So when you're getting set up for advertising, I recommend doing these both in the same day. Pick your keywords and then write ads that contain those keywords is the easiest way to do it, rather than picking your keywords one day, coming back to it a week later, writing some ads that sound great, and then finding out you didn't actually include any of your keywords in your ads. So those are my two tips off the bat, is like do this in one sitting so that it's all fresh in the brain and you're really creating them together. And then also think about the intent behind searches and whether they're similar enough that you could have a relevant ad for different searches together, or if there's a different enough intent that you have to create some different ads to really help that relevance.
Awesome, thank you for that.
Any other questions about this before we move on? All right, the last thing I'll say, just kind of the elephant in the room, and probably couldn't have said it to you if I were still working at Google, but I'll say it now. Do not start with ads if you don't even know if your website converts yet. Often we're tempted when we have a product or a service and we're just launching, let's just run a bunch of ads, we're gonna blow it out of the water. And it's a really common mistake, but you have to know first, like, do we have product market fit? Do we understand who our audience is? Is our solution what they're looking for? Are we messaging it the right way? If you haven't sorted out those problems, ads is going to make your problems bigger, not smaller, because you'll spend a bunch of money that's not going to drive results for you. So the analogy I like to use is when you're building the foundation of your business, right? You're like building the campfire, you're putting all the logs together and you have a little bit of kindling you're trying to get going. If you just pour gasoline on a pile of logs, you end up with wet, smelly logs. Whereas if you pour gasoline onto a well-lit fire, you get a really nice big fire that's going to keep you warm for a long time. So as much as you're able to, try to drive organic traffic, non-paid traffic, through your website first to understand if it converts and if you found the right people. And there's lots of ways to do this. I spoke a little bit about SEO. I built my business using TikTok. I'm sure many of you are familiar with various social platforms, Pinterest or LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever. If you can, drive organic traffic first, make sure your website works, make sure your sales process works, make sure you have a conversion rate of at least 1%, if not closer to 3 to 5%. And only then, once you've figured out what's working, pour on some ads gasoline and make that a huge fire. But if you try to just start with ads from day one, I can pretty much guarantee you won't like the results, and it will be an expensive way to learn whether or not you actually have product market fit. So we've defined our target audience and understand how to find them across channels. We know what action we want them to take and understand how we can drive that through ads, although that may not always be the first step we want to take. And now we need to measure, have the foundation in place to understand, is all of this marketing stuff actually working? The example I'm going to give you here about how to answer this question pretty quickly is an e-commerce example. And this is actually the exact words that if you use Shopify, you would find in their dashboard. But note that if you're a lead gen business, it works the exact same way. Instead of add to cart and reach checkout, for a lead gen business, it might be visited contact form, filled out contact form. So with that caveat, in this example, first you want to look at the number of people who are doing each of these things you want them to do. And when you're mapping out the customer journey this way, you want to map out just those steps that are absolutely required for conversion. So someone may visit your pricing page, for example, but if it's not a required step in the conversion journey, you don't include it here. These are just the steps that the minimum steps someone must take in order to purchase from you. You want to map out each individual step so you can understand the customer journey. So here there's sessions, which is analytics speak for number of visits to your website. Then of those sessions, how many added something to cart? Of those who added to cart, how many reached checkout? And then how many of those converted? And these are actual numbers from a Shopify store I work with. So out of 14,000 sessions, we have 516 purchases. The next thing we want to do is actually calculate the conversion rate at every step of the funnel. Often what entrepreneurs will do is just look at that 3.6 number, which is 516 divided by 14,333, and say, okay, my conversion rate is 3.6%. Is that good or bad? What do I do with that? I don't know. Instead, calculate the conversion step at every single stage, because you're losing people at every single stage. And the more you can get someone from one stage to the next, the more your conversion rate will increase and the lower your customer acquisition cost will be. So in this example, we've calculated that of everyone who comes to the site, 14% add something to their cart, 55% of those who add to cart reach checkout, and 46% of those who reach checkout complete checkout. Now we can actually optimize this. We can say, okay, 14% of people add something to the cart. How do we improve that? What initiatives can we do to try to get more people to add something to cart? Maybe we need to feature more products on the homepage. Maybe we need a quick view button. You can imagine a lot of different initiatives you could do to focus just on improving that piece of the conversion rate. And then we look at the next step. Of those who add to cart, about half reach checkout. Well, why aren't more people reaching checkout? Again, it's not that 55 is good or bad. There's no judgment on it. It's just we always want it to be better. How can we get more people to start the checkout process? Do we want to have, a banner or different coupon codes, or have the shopping cart flash a little bit? What could we test to improve that? And then of those who start checkout, again, only half finish. Why aren't they finishing? What if we lower our shipping rates? What if we add an incentive? What if we more clearly define the journey? What if we add more payment methods? By breaking the customer journey down into each required step, you can learn or come up with ideas of what you could actually do to improve each step. And that's much more achievable than just saying 3.6%. What do I do with that? Now, once you understand your conversion rate at each step, we're now going to work backwards to figure out what you could actually spend on customer acquisition if you're ready to start buying ads. Because that's another really common question I hear. Okay, I want to start running Google ads. How much should I spend? So first, you need to know your conversion rate. And then next, you need to know your average order value. So in this example, the overall revenue this total, not average order value, from all of these 516 purchases was $25,800. So now we can actually break down the revenue per each step. Let me walk you through these numbers again. So now we start at the bottom. Total revenue, $25,800, divided by the number of sessions gives us an average order value of $50. So on average, every time someone buys from us, we get $50. Using those conversion rates in the second column there, we can then work our way back up. If it's worth $50 to us when someone buys, then based on 46% of those who reach in checkout buying, it's worth $23 to us when someone reaches checkout. Based on that previous conversion rate of 55%, it's worth $12.72 to us every time someone adds to cart. And then based on 14%, it's worth $1.80 revenue per session. If you're not tracking revenue per session, especially if you are kind of an e-commerce business or a business that can track revenue on a transaction, you absolutely should. Because what $1.80 revenue per session tells us is that we can spend up to $1.80 to bring someone to our website on average to reach a profitable outcome. In this case, we're looking at revenue because e-commerce businesses often just need to break even at the beginning and go on later. If you need to focus on profitability and profit per session, then absolutely feel free to use those numbers instead. But knowing that we have $1.80 to work with, now we know what we can spend on Google. I can spend up to $1.80 cost per click to bring someone to my site, or on Facebook or TikTok or wherever else you're choosing to run advertising. And given all these downstream conversion rates, I can expect it to be profitable, to have a CAC that I'm okay with, given that initial customer acquisition cost. And then from there, how much should I spend? You want to spend enough to have at least one conversion per day in order for any kind of digital ad platform machine learning to be profitable. So in this example, we know that we're willing to spend up to $50 for one conversion. That means you'd be looking at an ad budget of at least $50 per day in order to have an impact. It can be tempting to start with, what if I just spend $5 a day? What if I just spend $10 a day? But this illustrates the problem with that. If you have $5 a day and you know that $1.80 is what you're willing to spend to bring someone to your site, that means what, you get 3 clicks per day? Probably not going to do much for your business. And also remember, these numbers work on averages. It's not a promise that every single person will cost you exactly $1.80, right? So if you only have 3 people a day, the chances of all 3 of those coalescing around your average is quite low. So as a starting point, understand what your cost per customer is, your CPA, as it's sometimes called, or your customer acquisition cost, and you should be willing to spend at least that per day in order for digital ads to be effective. If you can't afford to spend that, that's fine, but then you should probably rethink whether now is the right time to add ads into your business. This is the number slide where I know eyes glaze over sometimes, so fully understand if that's what's happened. But please let me know if you do have any questions about calculating your conversion rate and average order value and how that ties back to digital acquisition. I'll pause for a moment here in case there are questions. Okay, so putting it all together, how do we create a growth marketing strategy that's going to drive our business? Very first step, which 95% of entrepreneurs I meet with skip, is to clearly define your goals. Who is our target audience? What's the action we want them to take? And how are we going to measure that? Once you have those 3 pieces in place, dive a little deeper into each. With audience, make sure you're bringing the right users onto your journey and filling that top glass first most efficiently before going on to other layers, and focusing on the audience you're reaching rather than just the context of where they happen to be. Then, in order to drive action, you need great content. That's quality, user-centric ads that are relevant with a clear call to action. And again, not spending money on ads until you know that your website converts, so that you don't light the money on fire. You want it to build the fire of your business, not just light your money on fire. And then lastly, making sure you have the right data foundation in place to understand whether or not you are indeed driving that audience to your desired action. And that is all I have for you today. That is how we can think about putting together a profitable growth marketing strategy as an entrepreneur. If you have any questions, you can visit my website, and I put my many social media handles on there in case that's interesting to you. I put out regular content about Google and marketing and all kinds of stuff. But at this time, I'll stop and open it up to any questions you might have about growth marketing or Google Ads or growing your business in general. And I'll look down here. This is where I have my list of participants.
Here, I'll jump in with a question. You can write your questions or you can ask them, whichever you prefer. How long should people wait until they start to see something? You know, what's reasonable? A week, 2 weeks, a month? Does it depend?
With ads specifically?
Yeah.
I would say the smaller your budget, the longer it takes. So as a ground rule, usually once you set something live at an absolute bare minimum, you shouldn't touch it for 72 hours. If you're spending sort of in the range of like $20 to $50 a day, you're probably going to need 6 to 8 weeks for it to really optimize and work with it and see results. If you're starting from a more $100 to $200 a day kind of place, you'll probably get to a better place within 2 to 4 weeks. But most entrepreneurs I work with generally start in that $20 to $50 a day place. And yes, I would say it takes 6 to 8 weeks to have the ads launch, gather enough data, start to optimize and make changes, rinse and repeat to get to a place where it's driving profitability for your business. It's tricky to wait. I know the patience is hard, believe me.
I can imagine, and I hear it all the time. And so just a few questions in the chat in case you can't see them.
Can't see them if you don't mind reading them out.
Of course. And so what's a good audience size?
Ooh, that's a question we usually, like Facebook ads usually looks at, of having an optimal audience size. In the Google Ads universe, we don't really look at audience size in terms of like millions or billions of impressions. Instead, we focus just on making sure it is specific and relevant to your business. So like the common mistake I see people make is like, who's your audience? Women. Or like, who's your audience? Moms. Okay, tell me a little bit more. So instead of thinking about the number of people who might be on that audience at any given time, I would instead focus on being really specific about who your audience is. And then if that is a giant audience that you can't afford to fill, then narrowing it further by things like location targeting. So for example, there's a company, actually 2 companies I work with where their target audience is moms, but not just any moms, more affluent and like cares about the environment kind of moms. And with their budget, each of them decided just to focus on Toronto, because even though they could ship across all of Canada, it's too expensive to do so. When you run Google Ads, it'll tell you within the first 24 hours, like of all the available eyeballs out there, of all the available impressions, how many you got. And so if it's very low, then you can use other factors like location to target more. But to directly answer your question, there's no right or wrong audience size. It's more about making sure it's specific enough and niche enough to be achievable for your business.
Got it. And this next question kind of follows in the same vein of, you know, what words, or how do you identify the best way to know which words you should anchor yourself to? So should it be hotels, motels, you know, just as random examples?
Yeah, as a keyword research. So one of the best ways to figure out like what keywords are most relevant for your business is actually to go into Google Ads. You need to set up an account, but you don't have to spend money. It's free. And there's a tool called Keyword Planner. And you can actually type your website URL into Keyword Planner. And then right away, it'll crawl your website and tell you, these are the words that we think are relevant to your business. And that's actually a thing I'd recommend everyone do. It's because even though the ads system and the organic search system run differently, they work off the same base algorithm. And so if you type your URL into Keyword Planner and it comes back with words that don't seem relevant to your business, that's a good sign. You might need to update your web page content. But conversely, hopefully those will be relevant to your business, and then that'll give you an idea of some keywords you might want to start with. But for the most part, like unless you are, Expedia.com, hotels would be much too generic. You would probably want something more like boutique hotel downtown Toronto, to be much more specific to a specific audience you are trying to reach. Generally, the more words that are in a keyword, even though it's called a keyword, like hotels downtown Toronto, that's a keyword. Generally, the more words that are in it, the more narrow and specific it is. And especially with the rise of voice search, we see searches are getting longer and longer and longer. So don't be afraid. You can have up to 10 words in a keyword in Google Ads. And while 10 might be overdoing it, it's not a bad idea to have at least 3 to 4 words per keyword when you're starting out.
And I think I remember from one of your previous workshops you did a while ago, which again could have been 3 or 4 years ago. There was almost a way to be able to tell, if one keyword was really, let's just say hot, or I guess expensive, being able to identify what's a similar keyword that may get searched as often, but isn't bid against. Is there a way to be able to kind of see what the differences are so that you're not, say, fighting with the Expedias and the et ceteras if you're going after, once again, hotel, which is not an example that's applicable to any of you here. So sorry, I picked it.
But the idea is easy for us all to understand. Yes, so the keyword planner tool I mentioned, when you type in your website URL and it gives you all these keywords, it'll tell you the estimated bid, that's what it's called, the cost per click for each of those keywords, so you can get an idea. But another thing you can do is search is a kind of context advertising, right? You're saying anyone who searches for hotel, I want to reach them. In Google search, you can actually layer audiences on top of it. And so what I recommend is, let's say that like hotel is genuinely the keyword you want. You can layer an audience on top to say, I want to advertise when someone searches for hotel only if they're on my remarketing list, meaning only if they visited my website before. Or that would be an example of using your first party data, your website data. Or you could say, I want to advertise when someone searches for hotel only if they are also in the top 10% household income. That's an example of a third, well, it's not really a third party, that's a Google audience signal that you can use. So when you're starting in search, you can layer audiences on top of keywords as a way to narrow that reach. And that can be a way where if you do want some of these more competitive keywords, you're saying, I don't want everyone searching for those things. I just want them searching for it if they fit into this niche as well of my audience.
Okay, perfect. And so just to get to some of the questions that have built up in the chat, and I know that this first one is one that a lot of people have questions about and, sometimes scratch their brain around is, how do you identify that best channel, especially when you're early on? Is it better to start with just one channel and just try to see if you can prove that out? Or should you experiment with multiple channels and see which one hits? So do you take that sniper or shotgun approach when you're trying to figure out what channel or channels you should market with?
I always recommend diversification because you never want to be over reliant on just one channel. And I'll give you a concrete example. One of the companies I work with now is actually a sex toy company. And as you can imagine, Google has some pretty strict policies about when they can and can't advertise, but those policies change all the time. So what happened to them a few years ago is their organic search traffic from Google just plummeted in half overnight through nothing to do with themselves, just because Google had a policy change. And so again, one of those things I probably couldn't say if I still worked at Google is that like Google is great, Google search is great, and YouTube, like everything, but you never want to just rely on one company for all your traffic. So when you're first starting out, I suggest picking 3 channels. 3 is a good number where it feels achievable, but it's not trying to do everything. To see if they work. One kind of like social channel, you don't have to do them all, but pick one that you think makes sense for your business. One maybe more like if you're focusing on SEO or content marketing, whatever it might be. Email is often a great one as well, more for existing customers than for new ones, in my personal opinion. But to answer your question, I don't recommend just picking one and going with it, because if it doesn't work or something happens, you can just lose your business overnight. I recommend picking 3. And maybe your 3 could be like Google ads and then focusing on my SEO and then Instagram. But a little bit of diversification is really, really important.
Perfect. And so just moving on to the next question. So if a website conversion rate is not over 1%, should you start to run ads, or should you wait until the conversion rate is over 1% from organic?
Yeah, I would generally say wait till you're over 1%, unless your average order value is really, really high, like in the thousands and above, then it could make sense. But generally, at least for me, like when I'm working with a company, if they don't have a conversion rate of at least 1%, then I wouldn't take them on as a client. For ads, at least, I might take them on as a client to help them with their conversion rate, because I would just say you're going to be wasting so much money. Because if it's less than 1%, for every 100 people who you pay to bring to your site, less than one converts. It's very rare that it would be worth it unless you have really, really high ticket item products.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree. And you always want to look at it as a funnel. And if the top of your funnel is so leaky that anyone you put in is just going to fall out, as Jyll says, it's just going to result in Google, Facebook, etc., being very happy because you're putting a lot of money into the platform, but you at the end of the day not being a lot of happy because you're putting money in, but not necessarily getting it out. And so the last question we have from the chat, unless there's anyone else, I think we've got just about 10 minutes left, is what is a good monthly search number for a keyword?
A good monthly search number for a keyword. I think the question is asking, like, in terms of volume, what should you be looking for? And again, I wouldn't say that there's like a good number or a bad number. I think it's more important to focus on your business. What are those keywords that your perfect target customer is likely to be searching for? If those don't happen to have a lot of high volume, then maybe search alone isn't the right channel for you. And then conversely, if there's millions and millions and millions of searches, great. It shouldn't be too hard to get a little piece of that pie. The one place that search ads can be really difficult is if you're creating a new product or like solving a problem people don't know they have. Because people come to Google search and they'll type everything into that box, like their deepest, darkest secrets that they don't tell anyone. What does this rash mean or whatever? Like they type everything into that white box. But if your product is solving a problem people don't even know they have yet, then that means that they're not searching for you, not just searching for your brand, but not even searching for what you offer. And so in that instance, you need to start with educating. And like video is a much more effective way to educate than a search ad.
Perfect, thanks. And I think just, going back to, one of the questions earlier around identifying that optimal channel, I think, you raised a really good point around if it's more about, education as opposed to, I have a headache, how do I solve this headache? That's really important in terms of the channels you want to find. I think, one of the things, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts of, for some people, there's so many channels out there, really taking the opportunity to identify, where is that target market kind of looking? And so, if your industry does Google a lot of answers, let's look at developers going to, Quora, for example, or going to Stack Overflow. Like that's where you probably want to try and advertise. But if you don't see your audience, looking to specific channels, like you probably wouldn't advertise to boomers on TikTok. Could be wrong, but that would be an example of what I want. And so it's really, where are the eyeballs? And that's the channel that you really want to go to, because those are really the audience that you want to get in front of. And so with your work, Jyll, do you help people kind of identify what that channel may be if they're just like, I have no idea where to start?
Yes, I do. When I work with entrepreneurs, that's one of the places we start, because it's about the channel, but it's about the format. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently because I've been growing my own business accidentally through TikTok. So I've learned a lot about that and video content. But like there's three main kinds of content, right? There's video, image, and text. And I guess also audio for podcasts, but I'll lump that in with video if you'll allow me. So something like a search ad, a blog post, email, it's like mostly text. And it's one way to educate, inform, inspire. And then image-based platforms, I guess Instagram is trying to get away from that, like Instagram, Pinterest, for the most part, really image works really well for e-commerce, for example, where not much explanation is needed, right? You see the product, you like it, you don't. And then there's video-based platforms like YouTube or like TikTok, which is really great when you need to educate someone about a problem they didn't know they have, or a way they can solve a problem, or who you are and why they should buy from you. And so as you're thinking about different channels, sometimes it's helpful to think about the format and like to pick a video channel where you can really educate. And by educate, I mean, you know, let's say that you're like FreshBooks and you sell accounting software. I don't mean educate on why FreshBooks is the best accounting software. Maybe you educate about like 5 things you should be thinking about come accounting season, right? And then pick an image-based platform if that's something that makes sense for your business, and think, okay, what can we show people that would be inspiring to them? I don't know if I could think of one for the FreshBooks example. Instagram B2B, in my opinion, isn't always the best way to go. So poor example on my side. But then on the text side, it's like, okay, this is where we have either like our short little search ads or like our longer form email content. That's where we probably could try to drive people more to specific action, but not if that's the first place they heard about us. So think about the formats of video, image, text, as well as the different channels to help you understand what might make most sense for your business. Because like, you know what? There are boomers on TikTok and there are young teenagers who use Facebook. You know, they're not thought of that way, but like audiences are all over. It's more important to start with like the message and what you want them to do and defining who that audience is before then going to the tactics of which channel are we going to pick.
Perfect, thanks. And so just our last question before we wrap things up is that Google offers to show ads on partner websites or apps. Is it okay to let Google decide where you should place the ad, or should you just stick to Google itself?
I prefer when you're first starting out to stick to Google itself. With search partners mean that if I'm searching for an article on the New York Times website, for example, that your ads could show in search results. But if you think again about the user intent in that moment, if I'm on New York Times searching for something on the New York Times, like I'm not in a place where I'm looking for a solution to my problem, probably, right? I'm looking for that next article. So I don't always recommend search partners. The way display ads work is they're always on partner websites. And then with YouTube, when you're running a YouTube ad, you can decide, does this only show on YouTube, or can it also show on other websites that have video? And again, if someone's on YouTube, they're there to watch video content. Whereas if I'm reading the article and some video starts playing on the side, in my opinion, like my intent is not there to pay attention to it. So for larger companies that need to increase their reach, like absolutely. But for entrepreneurs, I generally don't recommend opting into all those different partner networks, at least to start. Only flip side to that is because so many people opt out to them, sometimes the cost per click or cost per view can be less expensive, but then the conversion rate's also likely lower. So if you want to test it, sure, but generally I'd say not to start.
Perfect, thank you. And I guess a question that I'm actually curious in is do you see any differences between, you know, countries? So is there a difference between Canada, US, or does it not really matter because Google just looks at the whole world as the world? And is there any, you know, particularities if you're trying to break into the US, let's just say, with your ads as opposed to Canada?
Yeah, I mean, digital tools are great in that they're borderless, right? Like with the click of a button, boom, you could be advertising in the US. From Canada to US, there aren't that many differences. You'll want to watch your spellings and make sure that everything's in US dollars. Like as Canadians, we don't like it, but we're very used to transacting in US dollars. An American will be totally perplexed if you put a C in front of a dollar sign, and what does that mean? So it's important to like localize for that experience. But generally from like the way it all works, the mechanisms and the bidding and defining your audience, all of that is the same globally. The thing that really needs to change is your audience the same in every country? Your target audience might be quite different. And with that, of course, all the downstream tactics from that change. And then the messaging itself might be quite different. As just like one example, like in the Netherlands or in Germany, people tend to be much more direct and literal. Whereas in the UK, that kind of messaging might turn people off. So there are cultural nuances, but digital marketing principles and capabilities are the same globally.
Okay, perfect. And so I don't see any more questions in the chat. And so unless someone's able to get one in right at the end, we wanted to appreciate or thank you again and appreciate you for coming in and spending the hour with us. Jyll, I know some of you have office hours afterwards. And so for those of you who do, you can just click on the Google link that you have in the calendar invite, and that'll bring you to your office hours. And so once again, Jyll, really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us. We will have the recording be available to all of you within the next few days, hopefully. And again, thank you very much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.